If you're a high-achieving woman who's exhausted by stress, stuck in constant conflict, and tired of being overlooked in the exact rooms where you know you were born to lead, then this podcast is for you. So here's your host, Pallavi Jain.
Welcome to Her Boss Brain podcast. Here's the paradox. Research shows women who assert themselves are often seen as less likable, while those who focus on being liked are seen as less competent. It's the impossible tightrope so many women walk every single day. Be confident, but not too confident. Be warm, but not weak. Be ambitious, but don't make anyone uncomfortable. Now, if you have ever second-guessed yourself before speaking up in a meeting, softened your language to sound nicer, or worried that being assertive might make you unlikable, then today's conversation is for you. There's real psychology behind that tension, and today's guest has spent her career decoding it. I'm your host, Pallavi Jain, and my guest today is Alison Fragale, organizational psychologist, professor at UNC's Business School, and author of the brilliant book, Likable Badass, How Women Get the Success They Deserve. She has spent decades researching how people gain influence, not through titles or power, but through status, how others perceive their competence and care. Welcome, Alison. We are thrilled to have you join us and for the amazing conversation that is about to unfold.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. And, together with Alison today, we'll talk about how women can rewrite the rules of likability, reclaim their voice, and turn self-advocacy into a strength instead of a social risk. So let's bridge the outer game of status and perception with the inner game of your boss brain, that calm, confident, and clear version of you that leads from within. So shall we dive in?
Let's do it.
Okay, there we go. So actually, before we go deeper into your intriguing work, how do you define a likable badass, and what really inspired you to write this book?
So I'll answer the second question first.
Okay.
In terms of writing a book, it was a long evolution for me to working with women. It was not something I deliberately set out to do, despite being a woman myself. I'm a business school professor, and I've taught negotiation and influence for over 20 years. And most of my audiences traditionally had been majority man. But I noticed that it was women who were often approaching me after these programs to talk to me about challenges they were having for two reasons. One was I looked like them, so I felt like a safe place to go. And the other was that women were having some challenges that perhaps their male colleagues were not. And it was through those conversations that I realized that there was a lot of behavioral science that could be used for women to overcome a lot of systemic bias that they face so that they could, despite those disadvantages, have outcomes that were just as good as their colleagues, their male colleagues. And so that was how I started to work for women. And so the book was an outgrowth of that, a desire to be able to give women more content than I could in a face-to-face session, which could only be so long. And also to help women who would never sit in a business school or would never sit in a professional development program or a major industry conference, that it would, be a way to get those ideas spread more broadly. Likable Badass, the title I hope is catchy. But I didn't just do it because it's catchy. It is a catchy reference to an underlying psychological truth. And that is that human beings, when they judge other people, are always paying attention to the same two things. The first thing we always pay attention to with other people is, what is this person's intentions toward me? Meaning, are they trying to be helpful or are they trying to be hurtful? Are they cooperative, likable, generous, or are they selfish, difficult, rude? And obviously, we gravitate toward and respect people who we think have good intentions toward other people. They want to help.
Yeah.
The second thing we want to figure out is, are you capable? Can I rely on you? So it's nice that your intentions are good toward me, but can I trust you to execute? Will you be able to do that?
Yeah.
And in psychology, we talk about those two dimensions as a person's warmth and their assertiveness. They are other-oriented and they are results-oriented. On the cover of the book, I just make it a little more catchy. I call it likable and badass, but it's a reference to those two fundamental dimensions that are really important in how we judge people. And that comes to the core notion of the book, which we can talk about, is the science of status, the science of respect. How do you get people to respect your value? And you do it by showing up as a likable badass, meaning you do it by showing up in ways that tell your audience, hey, I really care and I'm really capable.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Thank you. And could you give us some examples? I know you give it in the book, which is, by the way, here's my copy. I was just showing it off. But can you give us some examples to be assertive and so, or some to be warm? Like, what would that look like?
Well, the key is to do as many times as possible to be both at the same time.
Yes.
And a lot of times people feel like it's easy to be really warm and it's easy to be assertive, but how can I be
Right.
warm and assertive at the same time? And that's particularly challenging for women.
Yeah.
So there's a variety of different things. What you have to do is you have to find a way to communicate to the other human being both of these things are true. Sometimes we do it through our words, the way we talk about ourselves. So we have to be able to tell stories that in those stories indicate both that we're really capable and that we care about other people. So, um, you know, just how we respond to people when we're in daily conversation with them. And I can give you some examples of that. But a lot of times we fail to tell our stories. Like we don't say anything about ourselves. We stay quiet, or we actually do worse than stay quiet. We might self-deprecate or cut ourselves down. And when we do that, the story we're putting out into the world is either I'm not very capable or I don't really care. So that's one thing we can do. The other thing is our actions. So what I always say is the best way to show up as likable and badass is to use your unique talents to help other people. So anytime you're using something that's special to you in service to others, then you're hitting on both of those at the same time. So I often will give the example, if you meet a new acquaintance for coffee, this is something I talk about in the book. If you meet someone for coffee, that's a common experience. And it's also common in that situation where you might offer to pay for both coffees, or the other person might offer to pay. It's, it's not a very expensive bill. But when you do it, you think it's the polite thing to do, right? I am doing this to be nice.
Right.
And in fact, you are nice. The problem is that that's a form of niceness that is very forgettable, that anyone pretty much could do, right? You could do it, but so could the person standing behind you in line. And so although it's warm and likable, it's not very capable and assertive. So as an alternative, when you meet somebody new, you could think about shifting to, whether or not you buy the coffee, thinking about, I could connect this person with somebody. I could make an introduction. An introduction costs less than buying coffee. It's just as easy. It's normally an email, hey, you two people, you're both amazing. I know you both. Here's why you'd really like each other. But an introduction is a subtle shift where you're still being nice because you're doing that for their benefit. But now what you're offering is something that's a little bit unique to you, that the person behind you in line probably doesn't know that same person that you know. You're offering your network, and your network is, again, special to you.
I love that.
So that kind of subtle shift of mentality of how can I be of service to people, but do it in a way that shows them, hey, I got something special here. And that can start with the people you know, the things you love to do, the talents you have. And that's another way that we can show up as assertive and warm at the same time.
I love that. Thank you so much. And I know like this is your core work and you've been working on this for such a long time, but I have to ask you this. Looking back, were you always assertive and warm, or did you kind of program your brain over time to be that way?
I mean, I grow just like everybody else. Like just because I study these things for a living doesn't mean I was born with a better set of habits. I have at times been, assertive, and I've also at other times, like everybody else, struggled to advocate for myself. I've also done it where I've overdone it, and I've been so assertive to the point that people perceived me as aggressive. And I probably actually was a little bit aggressive. And having to find my own ways to cultivate the warmth and assertiveness that feel really authentic to me. So I'm still growing. I have definitely evolved and improved, and thinking about these things as a day job helps a lot because it forces me to really, understand the science and then think, okay, well, you need to live it. But no, it's not like I've been the same warm, assertive person ever since I was a child. Just like everybody else, I'm figuring it out.
Yeah, and I think it is so important because I feel like that means that you don't have to be born likable badass, but you can become one, right? Is that right? Because I think
100%.
Yeah, because I wanted that is so important because I really want to pause here and let this sink in for our listeners today because a lot of us feel that, oh, I am not that kind of a woman who always have everything together. You don't have to be, but you can become one. So this is part of what I call here, like you're activating your boss brain to be in control of your life and you to realize that your past doesn't define your future and that you can be your own kind of boss, be on self-start and create your own narrative of how you want to be perceived by others, which is a likable badass in this situation. And you can start that today, because I think that is just so important for us to point that out because you and I mean, in our own journeys, we were not where we are today. It's still an evolution.
100%. And I also know that, well, I assume that your listeners are as busy as you and I are, which is
Exactly.
you don't have time to spend your whole day focused on these things. We are just trying to get through the day. And so I also think the other really important thing is we can have a really big impact on how we're perceived and how we're respected through actions that can be really small and not take up any time at all once we start to practice. So yeah, I'm a huge believer that everything in leadership is a learned skill. Do some people start off like, are some people quicker learners than others? Just like if you go take swimming
Yeah.
lessons,
Yeah.
do some people learn to swim a lot faster? Sure, but everybody gets there. And it's just a question of practicing until you find your ways that you can do things that are authentic, that don't take you a lot of time, but that bring in big results.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. And think I've mentioned it to you when we met also that what I love about your work is how it helps women build influence from the inside out because you use psychology, you use strategy and master plays to help women be both assertive and warm. And you beautifully explain that you don't have to compromise one for the other. And I have to say that for me, that was truly the most intriguing part because even as an HR leader, for so many years, I remember and I don't know if I shared this with you, but I remember once sitting in a meeting years ago, where a big decision was being made, and I had a strong opinion that could have changed the direction. But I told myself, don't be too pushy, don't make people uncomfortable. So I just stayed quiet and I smiled. And when it didn't work out later, I realized that I hadn't just lost that moment of influence, I had lost a little trust in myself. And I was trying to be warm. And I understand now that how often women myself included, we trade impact for approval without even realizing it. And we got to change that narrative at some point. So you talk a lot about how women can reclaim that balance, not by changing who we are, but by changing how we show up. So in your experience, you train several executives, do workshops, all these speaking engagements, for women in particular. What do you think is the biggest misconception women have about being likable?
I think there's a lot of reactance to likability. So one interesting thing that happened when I wrote this book is I wasn't sure what the reception would be,
Yeah.
that I was offering women evidence-based strategies to solve a problem that we all agree they did not create, right? They're just left with the problem. And the response has been really beautiful. Like people have felt really empowered by the message. Like, okay,
Yes.
like now I can see this science. Like I kind of get what's been happening around me all this time. And I
Yes.
think I have a path forward. And so that's been really lovely. But to the extent that people question anything, the
Yes.
biggest question I get is around the use of the word likable and this idea that there's a lot of reactance because for years, women in particular have been told to be likable and conditioned to be likable. And they're quite tired of being told that. And so whenever anyone says it, their first thought is like, no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
And so I want two things can be true at the same time. The first is you can be annoyed at all the feedback you've gotten in your life to be likable.
Right.
But you can also be informed about the science.
I love
And
that.
the science of likability for men or women is very, very clear, which is likability is a huge source of influence. So if you've ever read the book Influence by Bob Cialdini, who's a psychologist who's done tremendous work in this area, he demonstrates time and time again how much liking influences whether people say yes. And we all experience this. When you get a request from someone you like, you will go out of your way to do as much of it as you can. When you get a request from someone you don't like, you are just not nearly as cooperative. So even if the feedback that's been given to women is really biased and gendered, it doesn't change the fact that being likable is a huge advantage for being influential. And we shouldn't, I always say, like, this is the stuff my teenage boys do. You tell them to like brush their teeth, and they're like, well, I'm not doing it just because you told me. And I'm like, really? You're going to let your teeth rot just because you want to show me that you're independent? So just because someone has nagged you about something doesn't mean it's a bad idea. And I also would say about it is that when you step back from being told to do things, when people like being warm, they like being helpful to other people. They don't, no one
Absolutely.
is happy when you have
Yes.
a conflict or when you have to be difficult or angry. You enjoy your life more when you can be warm and giving. You just want to do it in ways that don't wear you out, that don't leave you feeling undervalued,
Yeah.
and that allow you to be recognized for the warmth that you give. And that's all very valid, right? So we shouldn't be chasing validation, but we also shouldn't be saying, I like, forget about likability, because it is such a strongly documented
Yeah.
source of influence. Why would we give that power away? Because the most likable people I know are women. So just
That is
lean
true.
into your strength
Yeah.
and get all the advantage you deserve from it.
Yeah, I love that. And again, like you said, once you bring that information into the picture of the science that, because we have felt that, but we can't always explain it. So, sometimes why working harder or being more competent doesn't always translate to influence. So I just want to take a beat and tell all my listeners that take 30 seconds after this episode and reflect, like, where in your life are you trading impact for approval? Because that's where your next level of leadership begins, right? And it is important to be intentional and strategic about it, kind of how you explain in your book. By the way, another thing that I love about your work, your style, your book is how you integrate humor and relatability. Like humor, that is one thing I am like not good at all, but like you're a genius in that. So for my listeners who have not read her book, do you mind if I just give them an example, which was like, it was so brilliant of you. So she says in the book, women really only want three things: equal pay, respect, and pockets. Like, oh my God, everybody would like just relate to that. And there is a chuckle in that. Like, oh my God, why do they not make these pockets in these outfits? So first of all, that was just an act of brilliance throughout your book, and how much I have like I haven't like I have to say your book has been one of my favorite book that I read. So I just want to tell everybody here who have not read her book, please go and buy it today. Likable Badass, and you will thank me later. So I don't know I've mentioned this to you about your book, but I thought I should it just came to me and I thought I'll mention it to you.
And yes, and that particular quote, the equal pay, respect, and pockets, was not by me. It was a quote from LinkedIn from another person, woman
I
named Lauren
see.
Howard, that I
Yeah.
saw and I thought was hilarious. So I put it in
Yeah.
there. So she gets all the credit for that. But no, I appreciate that. And yes, it is very much very true. It rang very
Yeah.
true, which is why it was so
Yeah,
popular.
yeah. And it was very enjoyable. Now, let's pivot a little bit now on another big thing that you mentioned in your book, which I think is super profound and it has really helped me, is that you talk about status, and which is basically how others see us, right? And you say that we are usually busy gaining power rather than status, which can backfire. So would you like to explain that? Because we have all high achieving women executives listening to this podcast, and I want them to really understand that, because I think as an HR leader, I was one 10 years ago who fell in that category. So if you can explain that a little bit.
Yeah. So power is controlling resources that have value. So at work, if you control the budget, if you can make a decision without getting someone else's approval, if you can hire and fire people, if you can give people good performance reviews or bad ones, these are all resources that people value. And so that gives you a source of influence. People are more likely to do what you say when you control the resources they want. And power is really important. It's really critical to living a happy life. We want to be in control, not necessarily of everything, but people want to be in control of something. And when we don't feel in control, our life outcomes and satisfaction is worse. Status is related, but different. So, status is how much other people respect and regard us. So, status is not something that we can steal or hold. It's only something other people can grant to us. It's their judgment of how valued we are.
Yep.
But like power, it ends up being really important. It's important for living a happy life. We want to be respected in our relationships. And when we aren't, our life feels worse. And it's also a source of influence. People are much more likely to do what you want if they respect you, or they're very unlikely to do what you want if they don't respect you. So they have these parallels. But power is because it's easier to like see and quantify, right? If I'm the boss and I have the control all the budget and I control the decision making and I control the hiring and firing, it's like I have that and it's there. Status has to become one every single day, right? In your audience's mind. So that feels a lot harder to influence. But because when we focus on power and we don't really understand the science of the status piece, we can end up in situations that are kind of common for women, but problematic. One is you keep fighting for the power and you don't get it. You keep negotiating for the raise, you keep asking for the promotion, you keep getting rebuffed. And what you might not really understand is maybe there's an underlying status challenge, is that my audience isn't really respecting me and valuing me, which is why they don't want to give me any of the stuff. Or the other challenge that you see is that people do they are successful in gaining power and they become, very senior, they become the boss, but they still might not be respected by their audiences. And then what happens is people try to undermine them.
Yep.
We really resent and dislike people who are in control if we don't feel like that control is really deserved with by their status. And so that situation can be really miserable for senior women in particular who have the power and are constantly giving these like kind of status slights, like they're interrupted, they're left out of the information flow, people imply they're not qualified, all these different things they contend with. So those are the challenges that we can have when we focus on power, but we're not simultaneously thinking about, wait, I need to get these people to respect me too, because when they do, all this other stuff is going to get a lot easier. They're going to be much more likely to want to give me the resources because they respect me. When I have the resources and I am the boss, they're going to be much more interested in cooperating with me rather than undermining me. So they go hand in hand, but when we turn a little bit of our attention to status and not just to power, a lot of things that have felt difficult will start to feel easier.
That makes so much sense. And it is so powerful. And, just to reframe what you just mentioned is about unpacking, the status that you mentioned, because I think it is so important that status is how people see you, right? So basically how people are perceiving you. So I find that critical because, in my lead from within and the boss brain work that we talk about here a lot, we talk about the perception as the lens through which we interact with the world, right? So now we talk about how you're perceiving the world. Here we're talking about consciously how you can shape the perception others have of you in ways that build authentic status. So because unconsciously or consciously, we are building status by how we show up for others who then perceive us, right? So why not do it consciously, which you're absolutely right. And that is the strategic and smart way to be successful and make meaningful connections. So since perception shapes status, can you share like what's happening in our brains or in others when we are reading these signals? Or if I have to reframe that question, like what are one or two behavioral signals, verbal or nonverbal, that instantly elevate someone's perceived status?
Yeah. So I mean, this is a great question. So first is this idea that people are judging us feels terrible. Like, I don't want people judging me. Well,
Right.
you don't have a choice. Brains
Yep.
are always judging other people. They're
Yep.
updating information and we do it too. So we
Yep.
can't get too mad about it because when you interact with someone and you have a good interaction, your brain is just going to like kind of
It's just
update in a
automatically
positive
doing it.
way. But if
Yeah.
you have a bad interaction, your brain will update in a negative way. So our brains are always, I mean, this is a survival skill that we have evolved to have. You need to know like what is going on with the other people around you. You need to know if they're going to help you or hurt you and for survival. So the idea of being judged and you're like, I just don't want people to judge me. We don't live in that world. Human beings, brains just instantly are evaluating other people. So then the only thing we can control is what signals are we sending? So I get your brain to value me the way I deserve to be valued. So that's really what the task is. And when done with well, it can be done with joy, authenticity, and not a lot of time. Because it's very exhausting for people, especially for women, to feel like you have to wear someone else's clothes and like show up in a way that's not you just to get
So true.
people to value your contributions. And that's not what I'm talking about. So the way you do it is thinking about your ways to
Mhm.
show up as caring and capable at the same time.
Okay.
And there are lots of different ways. So, for example, like things that I do a lot of, right, is I make a lot of introductions. In terms of being warm, I talk about nonverbals. So, yeah, nonverbal behavior is a cue that people take. Like, are you friendly? Are you not friendly? I
Exactly.
talk a lot about in the book about smiling. Like, if someone comes up to you and they're smiling, what does your brain think? Your brain thinks like they're happy. They're
Yeah.
happy to see me, they're happy in general. And if someone comes up to you and they have like a really like furrowed brow, you're like, something's wrong.
Yeah, what's
That's what
going
your
on?
brain is going to think. And then you're going to think, what's wrong? Did I do something? Or, is that how are they mad at everyone? So our brains are going to take those signals. In my case, I'm not a great natural smiler. I often, especially when I'm thinking about something, I get
Yeah.
really like scrunchy. And people will often ask me, what's wrong? And I'm like, nothing's wrong. But it took me a while to realize, oh, why are they saying that? They don't
Yeah.
know what I'm thinking. All they
Right.
can do is like, what am I showing? And if I'm showing something that looks unhappy, then they're wondering, are you unhappy? And I realized, wait, it's not good for my brand for people to walk around thinking I'm unhappy with them when in fact I am not, right? Why would I want that? So for me, for example, I've evolved. Like I'm much better at conveying warmth through words than I am through nonverbals. So my nonverbals may not be great, but if my words are great, right? I'm complimenting people. I'm looking for opportunities to like use my network and platform to elevate them or to introduce them or to, all those things. Then that person can see, oh, wait, her intentions are good. Like she's really trying to be helpful. And so that's, examples. With assertiveness, I think it's really about using the talents that you have and figuring out how you can let them, show for others. So, for example, like, for me, because of the work I do, a lot of times people will ask me like for things that they should read, like in behavioral
Yeah.
science, right? Or they'll ask
Yeah.
me for articles, or they'll ask me for negotiation advice because of what I do, right?
Right.
And when I offer that type of advice, it's allowing me to not just be helpful, but to be helpful in an area where I show up as expert
True.
and to look for those opportunities of things that you like to do. But I always say to people, they don't have to fall within your job. I have 3 kids. I've rely very heavily on amazing childcare that I have since, for 16 years that I've been a parent.
Yeah.
And I notice this is an area a lot of times where I see other really successful, high achieving women like struggle and feel like they just don't have the right childcare support to be able to work worry free. And so I consider this something I'm really good at. And I know a lot about it. And I've hired a lot of childcare in 16 years. And so I've given a lot of like childcare advice to people about how to hire good people and how to set up the expectations and what to do. And that's not part of my job. Like I am no
Yeah.
means a childcare expert. I'm just a
Yeah.
mom trying to survive at work. But when I noticed that I was better at something than a lot of my friends, I thought, here's an area where I can help people. And by helping
That's
people and
good.
telling them something they haven't thought of or they don't know, your helpfulness also shows off your expertise. So that I think is a way that people can start to observe themselves and think about what do they like, where do they have good advice to give, where can they really help people, and think about easy ways to do that. And it doesn't even have to be something you're doing in person. I talk about a woman that I got connected to who developed a list. She kind of curated a list of 40 ways to say no when someone asks you to
Oh,
do
wow.
something. But long story short, she wrote it down.
Wow.
And she became kind of well known for this list because everyone has a hard time saying no.
Yeah.
And when people would struggle to say no over time, they'd be like, go ask Claire. She has this great list of 40 different
Oh my
ways you can say
goodness.
no. And so once she developed this list, it became this like cult thing where everyone wanted to talk to her. But she had it written down. She would just send it to them or text it to them. Here you go.
Wow.
She wouldn't spend very much time at all. So
Yeah.
once you start to think about the ways in which you really show up as knowledgeable and expert, you can lean into those things and find ways to offer them
Beautiful.
to other people. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's gold right there. And I love what you mentioned that using your talent, using what you are good at to figure out how you can help others with that in a warm way. That's a great strategic way of helping others, being warm, and it's beautiful. So thank you for sharing that. I know you have like gazillion master plays in your book, which is one of the again cool parts of the book. And I know one of them was that really stood out to me was your advice to simply ask, because even in the work that we do here, it's like I call this quiet sabotage when women assume defeat before it even happens. So your approach to not overthink and just asking is genius because worst cases they will say no. And you mentioned that the best time to make the ask is the moment you think of it, which is so smart. If you look at the brain science, because you don't want it to get into that self sabotage and overthinking about it. So that's one of my favorite ones, which I think is so genius. But do you want to talk about some other master plays that you would like to call out here that our badass women listening today can try this week?
Sure. So, a couple of status building ideas. One is we have to practice talking about ourselves in ways that convey our capability. So I'm going to call this self-promotion. Nobody likes that term, even me, and I study this as part of my, research. But we can also call it storytelling.
Yeah.
People don't know about us normally unless we tell them stuff. Most of what people know comes from us. So we have to find ways to tell people. And one of the ways that comes up most often in people's daily lives that we miss is the introductory questions that people ask, like, how are you? What's up? What's new? How's it going? Like questions that people ask that are kind of feel like glorified hellos. And a
Yes.
lot of times then we just respond with, I'm fine, I'm good, I'm busy. But that when you have that moment, you have this moment where someone's asking you about your story. Now, you have to handle the moment gracefully. You cannot give them a 30-minute description of your life. They will be incredibly annoyed. But you could give them a 10-second response that's different than fine, good, or busy that might make them curious or tell them about a win. You might say, like, this week has been an amazing work week. And then they are probably going to say, oh, cool, why? And then you get to talk about, here's a win I had, or here's how I really helped someone. So when people ask you how you're doing, I encourage you, if you have 5 seconds, say something that kind of gets them in the conversation and gets them curious. And now it's a conversation where they're asking you questions. And I see people who are able to talk about themselves do that really nicely. They'll say,
Yeah.
oh, like, here's something cool that happened at work today, or here's something I'm struggling with, whatever it is. So that's one. Practice your response when someone says, what's up, or how's it going? And don't just say fine, good, or busy. If you're really terrified of saying anything about yourself, then practice with people you'll never see again. Because even strangers ask you how it's going, people on airplanes and people at the grocery store and things like that. That's one thing. The other thing you can look for is what's called dual promotion in the research, or I call it brag and thank,
Okay.
is take an opportunity this week to go public about something you did well while also thanking other people. So a common context at work might be you've worked really hard on something and you want to update some senior people on how the progress, right? We've had a great week. The project is going along really well. I'm going to send an update email. And I'm going to include a lot of people who I need to respect me. And when I
Right.
do this, I'm going to say, here's how things are going well. And then the second part, the thank part, is I'm also going to specifically call out and thank people who played a role in this success. So I'm not going to undermine my own role, but I'm going to give them the spotlight too. And research shows that when we do this, we get credit for both the likable and badass at the same time. We're seen as badass because we had the win, and we're seen as really likable because we're sharing the spotlight. So taking an opportunity just to send a team update or an update like that, posting on social, some kind of win like that, is a great way to practice telling a story about yourself that highlights your capability and also that you care about other people. And then I'll give you one more,
Yeah, go
and
for
that
it.
is one simple thing. This one will not take much convincing. That is super powerful that people can do
Okay.
is become a talker upper of all the great work that people are doing around you. Meaning, when you
Okay.
see someone doing something and you're like, that's great,
Yeah.
don't just think that in your head.
Say it.
Say it, put it out there in the world. Tell as many people as you can. Tell that person, why is this so important? First, it's fun to live like that, right? It's fun to celebrate people, it's fun to lift them up. But it's also incredibly strategic because our status is built by how we talk about ourselves, but it is also built by how other people talk about us, generally when we're not around. So when you go
Absolutely true.
throughout your day, you realize how much people are talking about or emailing about other people.
Yes.
And some of it's really positive, like, oh my gosh, like, Pallavi, Allison, you guys need to know each other. You're both amazing. That's great. Some of it's negative, people talking others down. So you want people to be talking you up when you're not around. You want people to be saying, because they're building your status for you. Well, you don't have to do anything. You're like off taking a nap.
Yep.
But one of the ways to make that happen is for you to promote them first, because
Yeah.
behavior in all of our relationships is reciprocated.
Yeah.
When you go to lunch with a friend and the friend picks up the bill, you make a mental note that next time you need to pay the check, right? Because you need it to be even. Or
Yeah.
if a stranger opens a door for you, you'll then stop and hold the next door open for the stranger because it has to be even. So when we talk up other people, they're eventually going to get back to them, right? Because it always does. Like, oh my gosh,
Yes.
Allison was saying the nicest things. Pallavi was saying the nicest things about you.
Yeah.
When that happens, their first thought is, how do I return the favor?
Yeah.
So by us lifting up other people first, we will also get a good percentage of those people looking for ways to build our status in return, which is, again, it's both authentic and joyful and
Exactly.
highly strategic by using reciprocity to our advantage.
Yep. Oh my God, I love them. And now you hear Allison talking, you know why she's my favorite, because she has so many other good nuggets like this all across her book. And I have to say, like, networking events was like, I would miss that opportunity every single time. And I was actually nervous about those networking events because I just didn't know how, like, talking about myself was so hard for me. And I'm getting better at that. But she's so true. Just for those tiny moments, they are like such a status builder if you have thought through some of your common questions you get and those responses that you can give. But one thing, when I'm doing, Allison, when I'm doing my lead from within workshops, like, they're managers, leaders there, and I get a lot of these questions, especially from the manager cohort, which are like your middle managers. And I notice that sometimes introverts struggle with this communication dilemmas. So, do you have any tools or any tips you can give? So, how do introverts go about building status? Are there any master plays for them? Because you hear that and you can see they're getting uncomfortable when you're talking about these things.
Yeah. So I really resonate. I get this question a lot. It really resonates with me because I am an introvert, which surprises people because when you have a job where you talk for a living, people
Yes.
think that you are extroverted, which is not the same. It's not true.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've had to find my own ways to do this. And so what I would say to people is you need to do some introspection and some self-awareness about how I'm going to assume that you care about people, even if you're introverted, and I'm going to assume that you are capable and good at stuff, even if
Yes.
you're introverted. So the question is, how do you like to show that? And you have to find ways that work for you. One great way to do it is find the other introverts that you think have been successful in this regard and talk to them about it. How have you done it? So here are some things I do, but they're not things that you have to do, but you have to find your own ways. So as an example, I find that I do a lot better when I'm behind a screen
Yeah.
because it's less exhausting. And in fact, when I eventually went onto social media, which was not all that long ago,
Yeah.
I did it very reluctantly because to me, the introvert thought that social media would be terrible because
Right.
it's just like so many people in your life and everything. But I actually found the opposite. I really liked engaging and mentoring and offering advice and help through social media because I could just write like in the privacy of my own office and then I could post. And that post could be helpful or it could be uplifting. It could contain information, it could contain encouragement, but I didn't have to talk to anyone. And so people like they engage with me on social and I find, oh, it sustains my energy. And yet I get to interact with this wide audience. I didn't really anticipate that as an introvert.
Yeah. Yeah.
But once I saw it, I'm like, oh, I like it. So I think you have to experiment as an introvert
Yes.
to say, if I cannot convince people that I care and I cannot convince people I know what I'm doing, I'm done.
Yeah.
But because those things are true, I just have to find my way to do it. Maybe, again, like things that feel joyful. I find as an introvert, the idea of interacting with people to be of service feels better than the idea of interacting with people just to socialize or to build my own reputation.
Yeah.
So when I go to like a meeting or a networking event, I set very specific, tangible goals for myself, like help 3 people and then you can go home.
Beautiful.
And so I work the room with this goal of like, I talk to you, I learn a little bit. So if let's say you and I had just met at an event
Yes.
and you told
Yes.
me what you did and you told me you did a podcast, I might be able to say, you know what? I know somebody who I think you have no idea is great, like back to my
Yeah.
introduction strategy, who might be a great
Right.
podcast guest. Like, this is the person's name. Here's their profile. You should go look them up and tell them I sent you. I've
Yeah.
helped you,
Yeah.
even if you don't, choose to pursue it. So I have those kind of goals I give myself when I'm interacting with people of a set threshold of being of service. And then it, to me, sustains my energy a lot more than simply you must sit through this meeting and chat with people, or you must go to this dinner
Yeah.
and just chat with people or the
Yeah.
cocktail hour.
It's the framing, right? So as soon as you framed it like you're helping somebody, and everybody wants to help others, so it definitely helps. And giving yourself some tangible, like what are you really, that's really powerful. And I know you mentioned something about that one also could probably introverts use, which was the out of office strategy
Oh,
that
yeah.
you talk about, right?
That is
Uh,
good for introverts for sure. Yeah, this is something I would have never come up with on my own, but I met a woman and I noticed that when I emailed her, I always got an out of office reply, like always. And it was accurate because, like me, she's a speaker. So she was legitimately out of the office, but I had never seen somebody use it so much.
yeah,
But then I read it. You get the out of office, and it was hers is like a little bit long. And I'm like, okay, well, what does it say? And I realized, oh, an out of office message is a storytelling device. And
yeah,
you don't have to look anyone in the eye. So her message would say, like, I'm off speaking for this amazing client in this amazing place, and we're doing awesome things. And I care about my clients so much, which is why I have to fully focus on them. And then when I'm back, I'm fully going to focus on you by responding to your email. And, if you want to text me a cute picture of your dog. And second I saw it, I thought, wow, what a great way to tell a
genius.
story,
Yeah, yeah,
right? You never
yeah,
have to look at anyone. Hundreds of people are going to get it in a day.
right.
And it never feels braggy. It just feels like you're telling me why you are
Yes,
not getting back to me right away. So it feels informative, not braggy, yet you can brag a lot in it.
right.
And so that's a great example of,
Yeah,
but here's the thing, even as an introvert, I still don't turn my out of office on as much. I now know it's a tool. I
yeah,
do it sometimes, but to me, setting it a lot still feels like a little bit of effort, and I haven't quite automated it as much as
yeah,
my friend did.
yeah.
And so it's an example of, hey, it's a tool you can try. And if it fits into your life and works for you, great. But if not, you don't have to do anything. You just have to do something. And so
Yeah,
find out on, like, whereas I am pretty active on social. So I'm not using the out of office strategy as much, but I'm using, social media a little bit more to
that's
do
right.
these things.
Yeah.
So you've got to practice. And I think talking to people who you think have earned a lot of respect of their audience, but also are like you, like in this case, are introverted, is going to be a great person to say, all right, how do you do this? Like, because whatever you do, I might be able to copy.
Yeah. And it's the practice part and knowing what you're good at, kind of what you said. So, do you think like our own internal beliefs about being good and nice as women are part of the likability trap? Well, like, can you really project high status if internally you still feel small? Because I think sometimes that's at play too, which is kind of your own limiting beliefs about yourself.
Yes, it is hard, I think, to work intentionally to get other people to respect you when you, on some level, do not respect yourself.
Yeah,
Because if you don't think you are caring and capable, well, how
exactly.
is you're going to feel like a fraud when you try to show up that way,
That's right.
which is going to trigger all the imposter syndrome types of fears. So yes, I do believe that when we recognize, right, our talents, and that's why I say like authenticity is so important. Because if you're actually doing something where you legitimately care, you're not faking it, and it's something where you have confidence that you say, I know something here, I have something to offer, then it starts to become a lot easier. It's a lot harder to build our status in situations where we might say, hey, I may not know, which is why it's harder for people often at the beginning of their careers because they feel like there's so much they don't know. And that's why I always say to somebody, you are always an expert in something, always. I will tell you this, like I have 3 kids, the oldest is 16. Here's my phone. Okay. When something goes wrong with any of my technology, I don't even try to fix it. I literally just hand it to a child and I say, can you
Yeah,
fix this?
yeah,
And they're like, here you go, mom. This is why your battery
exactly.
was running out. Okay, you're fixed now. They're 16. So if a 16-year-old is my tech support, you as a fully functioning adult, even if you're new in your career, I guarantee you know something about whatever it is that your colleagues do not know. Figure it out, lean into it, and start talking about that thing because it'll instantly boost you. Like as soon as you go in
I
that
love
expert
that.
role, you feel confident. And then
Yes.
you're also being helpful and people start to learn to reach out to you. And it doesn't have to be a big high level skill at the beginning. It just has to be
Yes.
something that's of service. Yeah.
No, that makes perfect sense. And now just bringing it all back to those actionable steps, those practice moments, you point out in your book that the difference between a habit and a choice is conscious awareness, which directly speaks to, and we have talked about this as my ATM framework that helps people get back control of their life by leaning within, right? So it's like A, you arrive in the present moment without which you cannot be aware. Then you do T, which is take responsibility and know what truly matters to you. And then M, make a conscious choice, So these daily micro moments, when you consistently apply the ATM and be intentional, that really matters. So if a listener today wanted to become a likable badass within 30 days, let's give them a target. What small or daily choices and actions would make the biggest difference? Like, how can they start?
So the first thing I would do is spend a little bit of time observing yourself, because you can't consciously choose how you show up if you don't first understand how you're showing up. And so
Right.
much of the things we do are just on autopilot. We're not really thinking about it. So a little bit of observation, I call it a storytelling audit, can be really useful to understand, like, what am I putting out there? And when I've done this for myself, I've realized, things like how much I was rejecting compliments, how much I was putting myself down and self-deprecating. And then that was the beginning of thinking, okay, well, how do I want to respond in these situations? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is I would pick one simple action. And I talk about this in the book as picking a swing thought. Meaning you cannot correct 10 errors in a golf swing. This is what a golfer told me once. You cannot correct them at the same time. Even if there are 10 improvements you want to make, if you try to do all 10 at once, it will be a mess. So she said, all golfers that are serious, they're trained, you only fix one thing at a time.
Beautiful.
And that's, I think, a good lesson for our own growth and development, even though I never golf and I never will. And that is, pick one thing you want to work on. So if it's simply, I want to be better at accepting compliments so that I'm not undermining the gift that this person is giving me while also convincing them I'm not really good at the thing they just told me I was good at, then that's maybe all I do. And I would do that until it started to feel more natural, and then I would layer one on. So those would be my 2 recommendations for someone to get started: to spend a couple of days observing yourself, jotting down what you see. And then if you identify an area of opportunity, do that and only that, and let everything else go. And then until that becomes a new habit that is pretty easy. And now you can move on and make another choice.
Make perfect sense. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I can keep going on and on with you. You're just, powerhouse of wisdom and all these cool tricks and tips that you give. But I want to also mention here and give you a chance, like, what's the best way for our listeners who can reach you or invite you to bring your science-backed insights and master plays to their organizations, teams, events, and communities? How can they reach you?
Thank you. So my website is the one-stop shop. It's my name, www.alisonfragale.com. And on it, I have all kinds of stuff. So if people are curious about the book, there's info in there. I have 3 different ways that people can stay connected with me and follow content. That's my newsletter called The Upper Hand, LinkedIn, and Instagram. So all free resources, you can subscribe. And then I also have all my media. So every podcast I've done, every article I've written, so there's a lot of information there where people can see the things I talk about and dig in. So that's where I would send everybody as a starting point.
Thank you so much. And we'll have all that information, Alison, and your book and your website in the show notes as well. So if you didn't catch that, you can find it there. And for all our listeners today, I just want you to remember that being a likable badass isn't about changing who you are. It's about strategically choosing how you show up. So when you balance assertiveness with warmth, competence with care, you don't lose likability. You gain authentic status and real influence. So before your next big meeting or conversation, I want you to pause and ask yourself, how do I want to be perceived right now? Because power isn't about being louder. It's about being more intentional and strategic. Alison, thank you again for this rich and science-backed and inspiring conversation. I really, really enjoyed it, and I know my listeners are going to love it. And to everyone listening, share your likable badass moment this week in the comments with us. We'd love to celebrate it with you. And if this episode resonated with you, please share it with another woman. Be the likable badass who's ready to activate her boss brain and lead with both confidence and care. And until next time, stay warm, stay assertive, and keep leading from within.
So that's it for today's episode of Her Boss Brain podcast. Head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, or wherever you listen and subscribe to the show. One lucky listener every single week that posts a review on Apple Podcasts or iTunes will win a chance in a grand prize drawing to win a $25,000 private VIP day with Pallavi herself. Be sure to head on over to herbossbrainpodcast.com and pick up a free copy of Pallavi's gift and join us next time.